Let's start recording. All right, guys. So, guys, shh. All right. So basically, we're at the point where we've largely finished this model up, right? So one of the things we need to be aware of when we're working on this stuff is that this is done, right? The actual retopologizing is done. We've got it in pretty good shape. You know, there might be some areas where I could maybe add a loop through here, do some other small little things, but this is pretty good. And ultimately, it's about showing you guys the principle, right, of how kind of this retopologizing can allow you to do some of these things and rebuild parts that follow the loop forms a little bit better. But at this point, we still have some modifiers applied to this, right? The shrink wrap and the mirror. So we'll just go 4 for object mode, right? And we'll just do apply all, right? So once again, having that little modifier tools is really cool because it gives you that little control up there. And you see how it applied to everything? So you can see the shrink wrap was applied, the mirror was applied. Remember, that's in Edit, right? Preferences, Add-ons, and then you just find modifier tools, right? Right there. Just like auto mirrors right here. Remember, these come with Blender, mesh tools, loop tools. Blender has these already there. You just need to turn the add-on on if you wanted to. So most of those add-ons you see in there are actually come with Blender, right? The only ones we've really added were speed retopo and text tools, right? So all the rest of those just come with Maya when you get it. So of course we have a retopo mesh right here. At this point we no longer need this body. So the original body I can get rid of. I can select it, I can hit delete, and it's gone. I want to rename this because I don't want it called retopo mesh 0.001. So remember, if you in the outliner, if you double left click on something, you can rename it, just like Maya, right? And we'll just rename this back to quad body. There we go. And so now we've got the body actually done, but you see how it's kind of retopoed. Now you'll notice wireframe's still on, so that it is one of those things where, of course, speed retopo has some of these controls right here. Of course, we can switch back to edit. But remember this little orange guy right here, right? We kind of talked about that a little bit yesterday in the review. So remember, this is your outliner, and this is your properties menus, right? So this is, as you can see if we hover over it, the orange box is object properties. And in there, if you go to viewport display, you'll see things like in front, which we want to turn off now, wireframe, which we turn off, right? And that really just kind of makes it so that only when we're in edit mode do we see the wireframe, right? So if we go to object mode, it's off. So if you have your wireframe on, even when your object's deselected, it really is kind of the wireframe being on here. Technically, you'll see there is a global one in here, right? So technically, if you go right to here, or sorry, one more over, right to here, you'll see there is kind of one more, right? That's got this wireframe options in here. It's where you can get statistics to see your polygon count as well. And we can actually see that the body for this guy right here is only 10,000 triangles. So that body is 10,000 triangles, a little over 10,000 triangles. So this is still quite an efficient model. We used subdivision modifier twice on it, right? Early on and then at the end, and then we did some retopoing. And you see when you combine all these techniques in this method, you still end up with quite efficient models. If you need to, you can add some extra loops in elbows and knees. It's always a good idea to have a little more in areas that bend a lot. So you can always go and add a loop slice or two if you want to there. I think we're in good shape for this guy for now. It's good enough. But you can kind of see the idea behind this method and these techniques still ends up giving you a nice low-res mesh that looks good, that's efficient, and it saved us time, right? We didn't have to manually retopo the whole thing. We didn't have to add in every edge loop by hand, and we combined kind of all of our best tools. We leveraged our subdivision surface modifier in useful ways, right, to save us a bit of time. We leveraged box modeling where it was strong. We leveraged sculpting and retopologizing where it's strong. Of course, we can bring up our quad gear, right? So we got an eyeball here to turn our quad gear on, and there's our quad gear. And of course, we can see that that has not been applied yet, so we could always go back to our blue wrench. And we could easily, in fact, I think I'm going to leave that on for now because I still want to do a little more modeling. But that will ultimately, when it's subdivided, only be about 16,000 triangles. So by the time we're actually done with every model for this, we're probably going to hit about 20,000 triangles for this. And that is actually a good budget for the vast majority of pipelines you're going to run stuff in nowadays. The old days of having to be scared of subdivision surface modifier are just gone. Some people hold on to them because they've just had that habit forever, and it makes sense when it has to be really low res or it's not appropriate for the model. Like if you're building a desk or a building, yeah, you don't use subdivision surface modifier. But like characters, creatures, cars, spaceships, things with a lot of curvature that you know are going to be tens of thousands of polygons, there's no real reason you can't leverage a subdivision surface modifier a decent amount. Just depends on the overall target polygon budget you have. All right, so what I wanted to do is I just wanted to do kind of a little bit to give, because I did want to do transparency maps with you guys eventually on this, so I'm going to kind of put a little bit of cloth in here that we could torn up, or even have it be hair. It'll be something that we could kind of tear up. So I do want a little bit of geometry kind of around here, maybe here and here, that kind of hangs off the surface. So we're going to take advantage of that with the gear. So you'll notice we could, of course, turn our eyeballs back on for everything in the outliner to turn on visibility. And of course, you know, we're in 4 for object mode, so I can just click on whatever I want here. In this case, that. And I'll hit 3 for face mode, right? Because it's a lot easier to just copy off of here than to try to use speed retopo, right? Of course, we could do that to draw these in. And that's not a bad idea at all, but sometimes it's overkill. You know, you don't really need that. I could easily just take some polygons off of what already exists. And I want to remind you of that, right? At this point, you guys are probably sick of retopoing a little bit because we've had multiple videos on it. So I figure this time we'll just kind of use a little bit of just copy and paste. So in this case, I can just go in here and I can select this face. Remember, you have in the select menu, select link, shortest path. I have a quick key for it because it's super useful. So I can just shift left click up. Sometimes you get confused. So let's go back to object mode, 3. Shift left click there. X, because that's what I have my quick key set for shortest path on, right? But remember, it is in the select menu, right? If you're looking for a select tool, go in here. Technically, you have select edge loops. There's actually a select edge ring as well, select inner region, select linked, shortest path, some cool stuff in there. There's even select similar, which is a little bit hit or miss, but can kind of be cool. And even checker deselect. We've kind of seen a little bit of those in previous videos. So remember, your select menu has just about all of your selection tools. Now, remember, one of the ways we can actually copy, because I do want these to stay part of quad gear, right? I do want them to stay part of it. In fact, I'm going to combine the eyes with this as well. For now, though, we're going to leave them separate. So remember, if we go to Mesh menu, there is a tool called Duplicate, right? Control D. Now, remember, this can actually be used at the object level. Of course, you can Control C and Control V in Outliner if you need to. But in particular, if you're looking to duplicate specific polygons, Control D, right? Duplicate, Mesh Duplicate, Control D. So I'm just going to hit Control D, and you see how it automatically duplicates those polygons. And then I can hit W to move them in a little bit. And if we want to, I could go to 2 for edge mode, and I could grab that edge. Shift left click to grab that edge. X for shortest path, because that's what I've set my shortest path quickie to, is X. And of course, I can move those down a little bit. But I also could easily say, hey, I'm going to extrude those. Control E for extrude. Because remember, you could extrude border edges, right? Now, one of the things to remember also about Blender, of course, I can hit Q for tweak, and I can tweak these up a little bit. But remember, one of the things you could do is I could just say grab this edge right here. Spacebar, remember, I switched that for my select linked. By default, it's right bracket. But I use select linked all the time, so I set it to what I thought was a better quick key, spacebar. I'm not an animator, right? Spacebar actually sets you running through your animation, kind of plays the animation. I'm not an animator, so why would I need that? So I was like, I'm just going to switch that to something I use all the time. I never animate, so I'm a modeling texture guy. So remember, I changed my select linked to a different quick key. It is right bracket. But you see how you can do select linked even if you're in edge mode? And I can hit E for rotate, right? And you see how the rotates in the center. So remember, one of the things that you could do is, of course, we can go up to here. We see that there's local, normal, cursor, view, which are all useful. But the one next to it that looks like a link, if you go there, there's median point, which is set to by default. Individual origins, which if you have two different selections on different parts of the model that don't touch, even if it's the same object, they'll have their own kind of individual centers, right? That's super useful. But remember, there's also something called active element, which is also really cool. So if I turn active element on, you'll notice whatever is the original element you selected, right? Because sometimes you can select the first thing or the last thing. It kind of depends on what you do. If it's select linked, it's whatever you selected first. I believe it's when you're doing like manual selecting, like by hand, with either circle select or just, shift left click. I believe it's the last one. But you'll notice it's the one that's highlighted white. You notice how usually our selection color is orange, but there is a white one, right? That is your active element. So remember, you have that active element, and there is actually, because this one right here, remember, this sets your orientation, right? It kind of sets your angle that your manipulator tool is going to work at. This is kind of your pivot point, the position, right? So these can combine in different ways, in very, very cool ways. It's actually, honestly, about as good as Moto's stuff for this stuff, right? Quite cool. So active element's really neat because kind of, in this case, the first thing we selected, and then we select linked, is that guy. And then I just rotate based on that, right? And we could rotate out this way. Or we could even go in here and say, hey, I'm going to select that one, select linked. And now that's our active element, right? And it's cool. It just stays on. So, guys, take advantage of these things sometimes, right? You can even set a quick key for the overall, like if I just right-click on this itself, you'll notice I can actually set a quick key to that. So I actually have quick keys because I switch those all the time. I have quick keys for both of those menus so that they pop up wherever I hit it, and then I just switch right there instead of having to go up to the menu. So even these menus with these options, you can set quick keys to. So remember, I know we don't use them all the time because oftentimes just moving straight up, down, left, right with the standard manipulator or view move works great. There are definitely many a times where being able to switch to these or these different ones is really, really cool. So just keep that in mind that you have that extra stuff, which could be neat. Of course, I could double left click to kind of move those down, maybe E for rotate. And you see on this case, I want medium point again. Remember, you can also grab the center here, right? Just grab here in the center, and it's kind of like a trackball rotate. Of course, you have the regular handles, and then, of course, the middle mouse button is just your view move. And once you get used to all those kind of techniques for manipulating, you really have just a top-notch manipulator system in Blender. All right. So now I've got a little bit of what we can see as kind of a cloth back here, right? And then, of course, I wanted to add a little bit more up here as well. So I'll just go to 3 for face mode. I'll select those. Control D, right? And in this case, you can see the last thing I selected was the active element, right? So there's always that one that's kind of whiter. That's your active element. So whenever you want to switch to active element, do that. Active element's actually really cool. I use it often, as well as individual origins. So kind of these three right here, as well as this one right here, are actually all quite useful to be able to switch between. Global, normal, cursor in particular, I use often. Those can be quite cool. So remember, you can reorient these things in really, really cool ways. Of course, 2 for edge mode, right? Because we can switch to our modes. Tweak tool still on. And I just tweak these a little bit. And remember, you can also just hit spacebar, because whatever you tweak is the last thing selected too. So one of the things that I love about the tweak tool is you can just kind of make those little adjustments. So I can hit spacebar, selects linked. Even if it's an edge mode, W for move to do a view move. And then of course we go back to Q for our tweak tool. And once you get used to these little workflow things in Blender, you really start to appreciate that they're honestly pretty amazing. It's just, the more time I've spent with Blender over this last year, I've just really appreciate its excellence. I can do shortest path there, Control E for extrusion, middle mouse button. And you see that this is all pretty easy to do just by copying a little bit of what you already have. And it just starts to give us kind of what could be fur or fabric. We'll kind of play that by ear later on. But I want to do some transparency map with you guys later on. Yeah. So just these little tweaks. I can tap spacebar again because that's my quick key for select link. W for move. Kind of make a little adjustments there if we want to position it. And there's just these cool little things that we could do like that, right? And of course I could go up here and maybe grab a little bit here. So 3 for face mode, select that face. We get down to there. Shortest path. Remember, select menu has select link. That's where linked is for selecting everything connected. And shortest path, which kind of just does kind of an in-between of 2 different selection points. Control D for duplicate. And the nice thing is you're automatically in a move feature also. If for whatever reason that duplicate's not working, you might still have auto merge on, right, up here. Remember there's that guy right there, auto merge, turn that off. Snap can sometimes do weird stuff. There we go, and I could always just 2 for edge mode, so I can tweak some edges. I can bring these out a little bit. So I'm just kind of trying to build myself just a little bit of kind of hair or fabric. Could be both. Like I said, we'll figure out what we want to do with it. It might make more sense to have like fur coming out of some of these areas. But that'll be cool. We'll kind of adjust and play with that a little bit later on as we go along. But that'll give us just a little bit of extra neat stuff to go along right there. Of course, if we want, we can do Alt-C for a loop cut there instead of extrude. But these are all tools we know, right? We've used loop cut a ton of times, extrude a bunch of times throughout the course of this year. They've already got great default quick keys. I just select link there, and of course W for move, middle mouse button for view move. And in this case, it was pretty easy just to duplicate some polygons off because we wanted these to be some pretty simple quad strips anyways. Retoppling was just a little bit of overkill for that, even though technically you could, of course, have done it that way as well. So one of the other things that I wanted to remind you guys that you could do is, since this is kind of more armor than a saddle, of course it could be a saddle if you wanted to be, we could add a couple of maybe shapes here. And this is one of those tools that I've shown you guys in some other videos, but we haven't really used officially as a tool. This is new to 2.92. Right? It's kind of right above the extrude tool, right below the measure tool. And you see it's plus with a cube. This is your add geometry tool. It is quite neat. Now, you could use this in object mode. So if I go to 4 for object mode, it's still there. You can still use it for object mode. But what I'm going to create, I want them to be part of this object, right? So I can be in edit mode as well. Now, if I go over and it says add cube when you hover over it. And you'll see it even tells you if you let it sit there, left control toggles snap while dragging, left alt toggles dragging from center, left shift toggles fixed aspect. So if you use control alt or shift with your left mouse button with this tool on, it gives you some extra cool shortcuts and functions. So it's really just your alt, control, and shift, which we already use for navigation as well. Now, if I hold down my left mouse button on this, because you see how it's got the triangle? Remember, whenever you see a triangle for a tool, it means there's other variations of it. So if I hold down my left mouse button on this, you'll notice that I have other primitives. I can add cones. So if I want to do spikes, I can. If I want to add cylinders, which I think I'm going to do cylinders, I can do that. You can add spheres. So I'm going to go to add cylinder, and it's on. You'll notice we have options up here, like the top can either do a triangle fan or an n-gon. We'll leave it n-gon for now, but that's cap fill type. Number of vertices, I don't want this to be 32-sided, so the number of vertices is how many sides it'll have. 32 is a little bit dense, particularly since this is already in subdivision surface modifier mode, so I'm just going to go with like 8. You can have it snap to geometry, which is usually the default and is great. Surface as well. And you'll notice that this tool basically looks like a sphere, and you notice how it snaps to the grid or the empty floor, but it also snaps to the surfaces. they added this to 2.9.2, and it's pretty neat, right? So you can actually interactively add primitives anywhere on the floor you want to, but also directly on surfaces. Super cool. Like I said, if you're in object mode, it'll make it as a whole separate object in Outliner. If you already have an object selected and you're in edit mode, it'll add it to the already existing geometry. So what I can do is I can just go in here, hold down left mouse button, right? You don't just left click, you hold down left mouse button. You see as I'm holding down left mouse button, you notice it's going to drop a cylinder in here. Now if I hold down shift, you notice how it keeps it a circle instead of an oval? And if I hold down alt, it'll do it from the center of where I clicked. And then of course I can get about the size I want, right? And then we let go left, and you'll see it'll actually kind of make it bigger or smaller, right? And so we can keep alt to kind of keep it at center, and shift if we want to make it fully big, but we can also control the size of it by letting go of shift. So you'll see if I let go of alt and shift, it'll kind of make it directly on the surface, and I can make the length. Alt kind of makes it so that they go out from the center, and then of course shift keeps it kind of uniform in size. Kind of neat, right? So I can do that about there, and there's that guy, and then I can do the same thing over here. Left mouse drag. Alt will make it from the center. Shift will keep it uniform. Keep it a circle instead of an oval. And then of course I can let go of left mouse button, and I could pull it out a little bit if I want to. Boom. And then we can make one more over here. Left mouse drag. Alt to do it from the center. Shift, so alt and shift at the same time. We'll do it from the center of wherever you clicked and keep it a uniform shape. Let go of left mouse button, and then we can just kind of adjust the height. And we can see that that's kind of a neat tool, isn't it? Right? It allows us to drop a bunch of cylinders in there, or spheres, or cones right on the surface. And they can all be a little bit different or a little bit unique. So of course I can hit Q to go back to my regular tools. I could select these faces, select linked. Right click, right, to bring up face context menu, shade smooth. There we go. And now if I wanted to, I could say, hey, I'm going to delete these bottoms. Or we could even select them. Right click. Because remember, if you right click with the faces selected, it brings up face context menu. We're just in face mode, right? 3 for face mode. And I could extrude faces along normal. So I could bring these kind of in. Click, and then delete faces. There we go. And you see those kind of stick through that gear a little bit now. And then, of course, I could grab these faces, right? Tweak tools on. Shift, left click, shift, left click. Remember, I is for inset, right? So you have an inset tool. The quick key for that's I. Middle mouse button, and it could kind of scale those in a little bit. With the inset tool still on, I could right click and use extrude faces along normals. And then inset's tool still on, I could do an inset. So believe it or not, you can actually keep some of these tools on, use another tool, and then it comes back to it right there. Now in this case, I'm going to do one more inset, middle mouse, click drag. And remember, I can actually switch to Q and 1, and you see how it switches that face to vertex selections. And I could right click to go to merge vertices. Now, I hit 1 because it takes that face selection and it switches it to the vertices that are part of that face, which is awesome. Very cool. It automatically does this conversion for you. Merge vertices. Watch what happens if I do at center. You see how it merges them all to the center? That's not really what I wanted, right? Does that look like what I wanted, guys? Nope. Cursor would merge it to the cursor. Wherever the heck that is, I'm not seeing it right now. It's probably in the center somewhere. But I don't really want cursor either. So if I right-click, go to merge vertices, there's something called collapse. Collapse is what I want. What it does is it takes each of these selections, because they're kind of independent of each other, and you'll notice it merges them down to their own centers. That's what collapse does. And you see that was really cool at letting me take these faces and turn them into single vertices on the top of this. And you see these are all have subdivision surface modifier on. They all have mirror on. I could go to Alt-C for a loop cut, and I could add a little bit there. I can add a little bit there, and I could add a little bit there. If I wanted to tighten this up, remember, in subdivision surface mode, edge loops closer to other edge loops, particularly where there's a corner, sharpen the shape up. And there we go. We've got these little cool cylinders there. Of course, they're their own objects, so I could, 3 for face mode, select linked. If I wanted to rotate that, move it in a little bit to adjust it after the fact, you could do that, right? But that's neat, right? We have that new add feature, which is pretty cool. And we see that, once again, inset, extrude along normals come in really handy. If I wanted to change these top guys here a little bit, right? 3 for face mode. Remember, if you don't have quickie set up for these, Q toggles you through your different selection types. One of them is a circle. Circle select is great at letting you just paint select, right? You just hold down left mouse button. Since the brush size is not 0, it's a pretty quick, easy way just to grab these ends. Up arrow. I could turn on R for scale. Now, scale is set by default right now, because this is set by default, period, to median. And you'll notice if I hold that middle mouse button, see how they all scale towards the center? Not what I wanted. But if I change this, not to active element, but to individual origins, and I hold that middle mouse button, you see how these all scale on their own, independent of each other? So once again, you see how things like active element and individual origins are super, super cool and have their own really unique, useful things that you could do with them. So just remember, we have some of that cool functionality there. At this point, I can go to 4 for object mode. And I'm going to select the eyeball. And actually, I'll select the eyeball first and then the gear second, so that the gear is kind of the active one. Right-click, because we're in object mode, and you'll see there is a join option in the object context menu when you have multiple objects selected. That makes them into one. And then I can just apply all from our modifier tools. And now we'll see that that is all low res. And we can see that our total polygon count, all in low res and looking pretty good in low res, is about 20,000 triangles. So we've ultimately ended up building a pretty efficient model that looks pretty good in low res by leveraging really all kinds of different tool sets and ideas. All right, I think that'll be a great place to stop the video.